Let's get started by talking about some quick appointment do's and don'ts. And for this, we'll first start out talking about a few don'ts, and then for each don't, we'll talk about what to do in place of that. And the first don't is to don't show up and throw up. This is the concept of scheduling an appointment with a prospect and then going on that appointment and just talking nonstop about your product and service. I'll give you an example of this. So someone reached out to me on LinkedIn, someone from an HR services type of company, and I was somewhat interested in the service that they had to offer, and I accepted the appointment. She scheduled an appointment with me. And then a week later, she came out for the appointment, and with her, she brought her manager or the person she reports to. And right after some quick introduction and minor chit chat, the manager pulls out a binder with the services that they had to offer and started explaining to me all the different services. He or she did not ask one question about me and my company. And this is what people often refer to as showing up and throwing up information about your product and service. So instead of this, what we want to do is we want to make it more about the prospect. And this goes back to one of the core concepts of the SMART sales system, which is trying to make our conversations and what we talk about more about the prospect and less about us. So what this salesperson and her manager could have done in this appointment is they could have showed up and then spent the first half of that appointment asking me questions about my company and what we do, and then make the rest of that conversation more tailored to what we had just discussed. And we'll talk about exactly that here in a few minutes. The next don't is to, when you go on appointments, try to stay out of order taking mode. Order taking mode is you schedule an appointment with a prospect or a lead generation person schedules an appointment, and you go on the appointment thinking that it's an interested prospect in what you have to offer because they accepted your request for an appointment, and you just go in there expecting to basically take their order, sell your product. And I'll give you an example of this. Prior to starting SalesScripter, I had a lead generation business where we scheduled appointments for small business owners. And what would happen a lot of times is that I would work with these small business owners and create the script for their telemarketer, their cold caller, their appointment setter. And with this small business owner, we would discuss pain points and pain questions to ask and name drop examples, all the stuff that eventually ended up helping me to create SalesScripter. But with this small business owner, we would create these really great scripts, and the appointment setter would use that great script to schedule an appointment. And the business owner would not use any of that information because they would think, oh, an appointment has been set, let me go try to sell my product now. And they would go out more in order taking mode. And so what we want to do instead is, even if a prospect accepts an appointment, we don't want to view them as being interested in what we have to sell. We want to treat that prospect as not interested yet. And with that, there's still a lot of work to do. We still have to build interest. We still have to do a lot of things that we're going to talk about here today. But if we go back to those small business owners, what they should have done, instead of being in order taking mode, they should have asked some of those pain questions and talked about some of those pain points and talked about some of the things that they were putting in the great script that we were creating for the appointment setter, instead of just thinking, oh, the prospect accepted an appointment, let me go sell my product and take an order. The next don't is to don't wing it. And what I mean by this is, you have all this product knowledge in your head and you might think, well, I've scheduled an appointment now, that's the hard part. Now I'm just going to go out and improvise, and I know this, and this prospect seems really nice, and I'm just going to use all my experience and knowledge to figure out what to say in the exact moment. And I'll give you an example of when this happened. So this is something that I've done in the past when I was a salesperson. I can think of one appointment in particular where I scheduled an appointment with an existing customer. So this was an opportunity for me to cross-sell or to upsell or to sell more products or services. And because they were a great customer and they accepted my appointment, I thought that I could just go out there and they're going to ask me questions about our latest products or services, and I'll figure out what to do in that exact moment. And I got out there and it was pretty much a dud of a meeting because they really didn't have anything to say. They accepted my appointment because we're a vendor of theirs, but I really didn't ask any questions and I didn't sell anything, and it was really just a wasted opportunity. So what we want to do is, even if we aren't scripting out our meeting and having everything prepared, at a minimum, we want to have a good list of questions to ask. This will at least keep the conversation going. If we run into a dead end or it doesn't go in the right direction, we can just fall back on our list of questions. So at a minimum, have a list of questions to ask, and I'll show you a bunch of questions that you can ask in your appointments here. Now let's talk about how to structure your appointments. So if we go back to the sales process here for the Smart Sales System and just review this a bit, this was discussed in a lot of detail in the training module on sales process, but just to review this a bit, because where we're at in the sales process is we are at the conversation step of the ICE sales process. And just to review what we need to do and try to accomplish in the conversation sales process step, format could be an appointment, which is what we're going to talk about here today. It could be an online meeting. Everything we're talking about here today, you can apply to whether you're meeting virtually or face-to-face. It could be meeting for coffee or a drink. It could be an extended cold call. It could be meeting someone at an event. And again, everything we're talking about here today can be applied to all of those. And our goals for the conversation or the appointment that we're scheduling is we want to qualify the prospect to determine how good or bad this prospect is and if we should progress to the next step in our sales process. We want to gather information from them. We want to build interest. We don't necessarily need to build enough interest so that they agree to buy our product, but we want to build enough interest so that we can sell them on the next step of our sales process. And the close for the conversation is to not necessarily close the product sale, but to close for the explanation sales process step. And the structure for the conversation or the appointments that we're scheduling, it could be anywhere between 10 to 60 minutes. I mean, if you sell something very simple, like for example, at one point, someone came out to inspect my house to sell some sort of service for termites. That inspection took about 10 minutes, and the inspection was the conversation step of the sales process. And then the explanation step was him telling me about his findings and the services that I have to offer against those findings. But most likely your appointments are going to be between 30 to 60 minutes. And where you end up there could be determined by how complex your product is or how much time you think you can get from the prospect. But regardless of how long the appointment is, 50% of the appointment should be on the prospect, and then 50% should be on you. So if you stick to this, it should help to prevent that showing up and throwing up. And then the questions to ask during the conversation or appointment, we can ask pain questions, we can ask current state questions, we can ask desire state questions, we can ask organization questions, we can ask qualifying questions. So I'll review all those different questions here in a minute as well. Now I'll give you an idea of one way that you can organize your appointments in terms of how to structure them and what steps to go through. So at first you might want to have some sort of introduction. I would say this is some sort of soft chit chat, not business related questions at the beginning. So some sort of warm open of the meeting. And then I would make the first half of the meeting primarily about them. And then you can make the second half of the meeting about you. And then at the end of the appointment, you want to have some sort of close where you're closing for the next step in your sales process. So I'll give you an idea of, depending on whether your meetings are 30 minutes or 60 minutes, I'll give you an idea of how to allocate the time to these different sections. So for the introduction, you probably want it to be a couple minutes. For a short 30-minute meeting, you can spend 5 minutes for a 60-minute meeting. Then the about you would be 10 minutes for a 30-minute meeting and 20 minutes for a 60-minute meeting. The about us is the same amount of time. So you spend the same amount of time you're talking about them that you spend about us. And this is where you're talking about how you can help. And it's 10 minutes for a 30-minute meeting, 20 minutes for a 60-minute meeting. Like I said, depending on what you discussed so far, you might want to qualify them. And this is asking some of your qualifying questions, and 5 minutes for a 30-minute meeting, 10 minutes for a 60-minute meeting. And then the close is the same as the introduction. So pretty quick for a 30-minute meeting. You could spend a couple more minutes on a 60-minute meeting. So just to give you some ideas of how you can structure and the steps you can move through when you're executing your appointments with prospects. Now let's talk about what to say in all of those different steps. And if we go back to the sales message that we created, we can use a lot of this sales message for what we talk about in appointments. As I mentioned already, those business owners that I was creating scripts for, they should use some of that sales message when they're going on those appointments, but a lot of them never did. And that sales message that we created, again, in a previous training module can help us to create building blocks, and we can use those building blocks for some of the things we discuss when we're meeting with prospects. And so for the introduction, like I said, it's good to warm up a meeting before you jump right to business. So to warm up with a few casual conversational questions, and I'll give you some ideas of what you could ask here. How's your day going so far? This is a really nice question to ask right when you first sit down in someone's office, or maybe they met you in the lobby and you're riding up in an elevator together. You could ask, how's your day going so far when you're talking to them there. If it's a virtual appointment, a good question to start out a meeting with is, where are you based? And I think this is a really nice question to warm someone up, to show that you're interested in them. And based on what they say here, you could follow up with the next casual conversational question, which could be about weather or sports or recent current event. That question may be tailored to their answer in the previous question. How long have you been working here? What did you do before? Where are you from? What do you like most about what you do? I know why I wanted to meet with you. Is there anything that motivated you to want to meet with me? This is a bit of a qualifying question. Their answer here could provide some really great information. I'll give you an example. I scheduled a meeting with a CFO at one point, went down, and I didn't know a lot of details about that prospect. And I start out the meeting by saying, hey, listen, you're a CFO. I know why I wanted to meet with you. I'd be very curious to know, you're a busy guy. What motivated you to take time out of your schedule to meet with us? Then he shared that there was something going on with his current contractor, his current provider, and he was just beginning to start to plan to make a change. So if I didn't ask that question, I wouldn't have got that information. And I asked that right at the beginning of the meeting when we're just starting to get to know each other and warm things up. After that, you could share an agenda for the meeting. We're going to do this. We're going to talk about this. And then you could ask, does that match up with your expectations for this meeting? Is there anything in particular that you were hoping to get out of this meeting? So maybe they're hoping to get some information. Ask them what they're hoping to get out of it so that you can make sure to either provide that or discuss maybe why that might not be a realistic expectation. But these are just some warm-up questions there to start out your meeting. Then we're going to move pretty quickly to talk about them, and we're going to shine the spotlight on them. Remember, we're not going to show up and throw up. We're going to try to learn more about them. And a great set of questions to do that are your current state questions. And we've already discussed these on a previous training module, but these are really great questions to start out the meeting with. A lot of the cold call scripts that we create start out the cold call more with pain questions and then fall back to current state questions. I like starting appointments out more with current state questions. What are you using today? How's it going? How long have you been working with them? When was the last time you made a change? And then after your current state question, a good place to go is you could ask some of your pain questions. By the way, these pain questions and current state questions are from the sales message that we created in a previous training module using web design services. So if you haven't watched that module, I would encourage you to go back and watch it at some point. But that's what these questions are if you're noticing that they're all tailored to web design. These would be specific to your product or service, and you can create those for yourself using our process to create your sales message, again, that we discussed in a previous training module. After your pain questions, if you still have time left, you might want to ask desired state questions. So current state questions are kind of like what's going on today, what are they using today? Desired state questions are where do you want to go? So what are the goals for the individual or the organization? What are the priorities? And so these are really good questions to learn about what's going on and to try to figure out if you can help. And if all of those questions don't really uncover any pain that the prospect's having, you could share some of the common pain points that you help to solve to see if the prospect has any of those. And then after that, you've talked a lot about them. You've gathered a lot of information, hopefully. Now you can start to talk about us and what we do and how we match up with where they're at and what they're needing. So hopefully there's some sort of match there and with what they're needing or the challenges they're having. And you could transition to talk about you by saying, well, we might be able to help you with that because we provide this service and we do this. In some ways we're different. This is basically your product building block, and you can use that when you're talking about us. Also, when you're talking about us, you could use your name drop building block, which is sharing an example of someone else that you've helped. Those are really good things to talk about in that little window where after they've talked about them, now you're talking about you and how you could potentially help them. Then, depending on what's been discussed so far, you may want to qualify them further because they may love what you sell or think that they need what you sell, but if they don't have budget or they're not the right person or it's not the right fit for some other reason, you may want to find that out, and you can use your qualifying questions to find that out because you don't necessarily want to progress to the explanation step if they're in the area that they don't fit with what you sell, or if they're in the area of not being able to purchase what you can sell for a long time. So qualifying them can help you to figure out if or when you should progress to the next step in the sales process. And so we just talked about qualifying in the last training module, but this is where you could ask some of your need to purchase questions. You could ask some of your ability to purchase questions. You could ask some of your authority to purchase questions. You could ask some of your intent to purchase questions. And then one other type of questions that you could ask during the qualify section is you could ask some organization questions, which try to gather details about the organization that the prospect works in or is operating in. And then after that, you probably progressed to the end of the appointment, and a lot of discussion has gone on, and now it's time to close. And again, the close is not necessarily to sell the product, it's to sell the next step in the process, which is the explanation step. So you could ask a trial close question, which is, what do you think about what we've discussed so far? Is this something you would like to learn more information on? A great next step would be for us to show you a demonstration presentation. Basically, whatever your explanation step in your sales process looks like, then you could express that that would be a great next step to go to. Is that something you want to put on the calendar? So there are just some ideas there of how to close the end of your appointment. Now let's talk about a concept of sales discovery. And sales discovery is basically an appointment or meeting or time that you spend with the prospect where you ask a lot of questions and gather a lot of information. Now, what I just showed you there in the appointment structure and what you can say has a lot of questions. But the reality is that I showed you a lot of questions, and there's no way that you could ask all of those questions, not even if you schedule a 60-minute meeting. So what you may want to do is have a step in your sales process for sales discovery where you have a step by itself where you learn more about the prospect, and you could do that at the same time as the appointment. So after the close for the explanation step, you may want to say, well, I have more questions to ask, which could be among all those questions I just flipped through really quickly that you didn't ask. So you may want to say, I have some questions to ask. Do you have a few more minutes where we can go a little longer and I can gather some more details before we move on? Or the discovery step could be a meeting by itself. So you could have the appointment, and at the end of the appointment, you close for the discovery step where you are going to gather more information. And then that would provide you a meeting by itself where you can ask a lot more of those qualifying questions and more pain questions and more current state questions. Now, in the same way, at the end of the appointment, you're trying to sell the explanation step. You actually probably need to sell the sales discovery. And one way to not do that is to say, can I schedule a sales discovery meeting with you where I can ask you a bunch of questions, which is basically what you're trying to do. But you don't want to say that because that just is going to look like you're asking the prospect for more time. So don't say that. Instead, what we want to say is something along the lines of, our standard process is to have a discovery meeting where we can gather some details about your environment. What's the best way to get that on the calendar? Or if you have 20 to 30 minutes, we can knock that out right now. And that's a step that we need to do before we show you a presentation or show you a demonstration or create a proposal for you. So you have time right now, or do you want to put that on the calendar? So that's one way that you want to sell and try to close for that sales discovery. All right, that's pretty much it. So the next training module will be on closing, and we'll go into deeper detail on some closing tactics.